Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Oh, hi, everybody. Welcome to the Rebel News Daily live stream. I'm Sheila Gunn-Reid, and it's Monday, so that means it's the Alberta show. So I'm joined by my colleague in Calgary, Adam Soos. Hey, Adam, how's it going? How was trick-or-treating with the kids? You had a brand new baby. Did you dress her up? Or him up?
Yeah, no, it was chilly, so he was just wrapped up and bundled, but the other kids were dressed up as Batman and Elsa, so very fitting. And I was wearing a full ghillie suit camouflaged on my front lawn, scaring children, as one should.
Oh, Adam, that brings me such joy because, as you know, spooky season is a Catholic holiday, and so I approach it with extra religious fervor. I want to say, as my approach to Halloween and scaring other people's kids and luring kids in with decorations you can see from the International Space Station.
We have to pull up your Twitter pictures of your costumes.
Oh,
there we go.
Okay, so yeah, thanks, Adam, for that. And AD, good job plotting against me. That's my, somebody pointed out that maybe my hair, when it's a little bit dirty and slept on, so let's say Saturday afternoon-ish, it looks a little Edward Scissorhands. So I'm like, I got a black shirt. I have 3 black belts. I have some steak knives. And so that's me as Edward Scissorhands. And then I went to a haunted house sort of the night before, and I went as one of my favorite people, Joe Exotic. Yeah, so there is Joe Exotic. That was my inspiration. And that's me. And the funny thing is, I didn't have to look very hard for the costume. So I'm like, I got some sparkly cowboy boots. That jacket is looking for a reason to be worn, and I never have an occasion to wear it. And then I have like my standard American like eagle, but with the flag as wings, and of course a sparkly belt. So my own sunglasses, my own camo hat, as you may be shocked to find out that's not my actual hair or my actual mustache. So those are like the only 2 things that I really had to put together to do that costume. That was it.
Well, I was looking at all these expensive costumes. I'm like, a ghillie suit, which can have practical purposes, costs the same amount. So there we go.
Yeah. You never need a reason to buy a ghillie suit, by the way. You'll find reasons to wear it too that you never even realized that you needed.
Of course.
I'm glad to hear that you had a good Halloween with the kiddies. We should tell everybody what we're doing here before we get into the danger zone. And I think we have a lot of content that's not exactly danger zone. So I think we'll be on YouTube for a pretty long time before we have to sign off and say goodbye, or not goodbye, but see you in a minute over on one of the less censorious platforms. So friends, this used to just be a show hosted on Friday and just by Ezra Levant. But then the pandemic struck and everybody was sort of grounded at the company. We couldn't fly anywhere. They didn't even want people leaving to go outside. And all of you at home, a lot of you were sent home from work and had to work from home. So we thought, instead of just talking to you on Friday for an hour, let's talk to you every single day, especially since all the coronavirus regulations were changing so fast all the time. And so it's hard to do a fully produced video on something that changes hour by hour. So we sat down to do the Rebel News Daily live stream. And at the time when we first conceived of this idea, it was a good way for us to generate some revenue for the company, because we could take something called super chats from YouTube. And that allowed you to sort of send us a little bit of cash, and we'd read your comment associated with the cash on air. If you had a question or a story idea, we would make note of that, do our best to answer it. But then Joe Biden got elected and YouTube didn't even have to pretend anymore. So they sort of went full censorship with conservatives, and we were one of those conservatives that they wanted to censor. So we're still on YouTube for now. And a lot of that has to do with, well, they don't want us here, so we're just going to stay here. We're kind of like the Kool-Aid man. We're just, you don't want us there, we're going to kick down the wall and come in. But they took away our ability to make money through super chats. So we still broadcast on YouTube because there are 1.5 million of you over there, and we don't want to abandon you. However, because YouTube is censorious, we also simultaneously broadcast on 3 other platforms that don't care about your politics. And I think that's the way it should be. They should really be neither conservative nor liberal. They should just leave you be. And so we broadcast on Super U, Rumble, and Odyssey. And all three of those platforms allow you to support us through a Super U shout, a Rumble rant, or an Odyssey hyper chat. And there's a bunch of different ways for you to support us on Odyssey, a lot of different ways that I don't understand. And Adam is making me a little more skeptical of cryptocurrency every single day. But it's something I'm committed to learning about either way. And there will come a time that we have to, like I said, say goodbye to our YouTube viewers, or see you in a minute, like I like to say, because there are so many things now that YouTube says we can't talk about. And we can't even say the things that we don't want to talk about. For example, our YouTube headline or a YouTube description, we can't even talk about the thing in the YouTube description that we want to talk about on air. We have to just put it in the description and then go somewhere else to talk about it. So we'll start off the show here and then we'll finish it somewhere else. I hope that explains exactly how that's done. Adam, now's the time for you to talk.
Yeah, so lots of stuff to get into today. Just making sure you're good there. Lots of stuff to get into today. I think one of the first things to get into, probably, and it's going to be jumping back to you, but is the whistle stop appeal. We saw these troubling rulings coming down for Chris Scott, Pastor Artur Pawlowski, David Pawlowski, a number of other individuals. And what was so concerning about this case, beyond we've gone through the ridiculous sort of the transcript and the troubling stuff from Justice Adam Germain, which, by the way, if you want to check out that content, go to firethejudge.com. That's also a place where you can sign our petition so that Justice Adam Germain is accountable. But the general blanket assessment, they assigned all these people, boxed them together, and handed them over to one judge who gave this blanket ruling. It was very much summary combustion for groupthink, for saying the wrong things, and they're very different and distinct cases. And the fact that this penalty, this universal compelled speech mandate for 18 months, was applied to all of them in the exact same way. There were some differences in fines and things, but the real sort of crux of the punishment was this compelled speech for 18 months. It was applied to all of these people evenly, which lets you know conclusively that this is about politics and not about justice. As soon as we saw that ridiculous ruling, as soon as we learned about this compelled hate speech, we knew we were going to appeal it for Pastor Artur Pawlowski and for Chris Scott and for anyone else who's basically been targeted by Justice Adam Germain. Well, last week, and you brought us the story, the appeal was filed for Chris Scott. So I think we should probably start with that if you give us a bit of an update.
Sure. Yeah. So Chris Scott, like you say, he was sort of lumped in to the judgment of Justice Adam Germain. He was sort of the appointed hanging judge with regard to the Alberta Health Services scofflaws. He's been sort of tasked with handling all of them. So I think everybody who's sort of waiting for a judgment from Justice Adam Germain, this should give you a good picture of what's coming your way. And, you know, during that judgment, he read things into the record and address things that were never presented as evidence about, you know, the nature of COVID and how it spread. And he said that Artur Pawlowski, his brother David, Chris Scott, they were responsible for the spike in cases in Alberta. I don't think there's been a case of coronavirus associated with Art's church. I don't think there's ever been one associated with Chris Scott's diner, or even the protest that was held at his diner that ultimately ended up in the contempt. So if we roll back a little, for some of you who don't know about exactly who Chris Scott is, way back at the beginning of the year, he decided no more. For him, initially, it was an act of survival. He's got like a little lunch counter in the middle of Nowheresville, Alberta. Literally on a good day, the community that he's in is 500 people. It's the only gas station. It is the only convenience store. And it's one of two restaurants there, and the other one is just a little lunch counter that was completely compliant. By the way, they closed down and they were fine. And they were sort of mad that Chris opened up, I guess, because he was getting all the business in town. And he has the local campground too. It's all one property along the side of the highway. And he just said, no, I'm not doing it anymore. I'll follow the stupid mask rules. I'll follow all their stupid social distancing rules, whatever. But I'm not closing. I just can't. He was going to lose his shirt. He opened, and then Alberta Health Services moved in. They were there just about every day, along with the cops, surveilling him, issuing summonses. But in the end, his act of rebellion inspired other restaurants to do the same, and it got to critical mass where the government could no longer contain it. And so they're like, oh, the science shows we should allow restaurants to reopen. So that's what they did. And it was inspired by Chris, and the government tried to save face, whatever. Fast forward, we've got another lockdown right before the best summer ever, as they say. And he says, I'm not doing it again. I'm not closing. You guys know the drill. I'm not closing. Cops came. Alberta Health Services came. They couldn't get him to close. So what they did was they seized the property. But not just the restaurant. They took the gas station and the convenience store too. And for some unbeknownst reason, the campground next door, which he also owned. They put a chain around the door. So Chris Scott says, okay, I'm having a protest because the government just seized my property. I have a right to express my disgust with the government seizing my property. Even I don't think they had a point with seizing the restaurant, but they also seized the gas station, which was allowed to be open, and the convenience store, which was allowed to be open, and the campground, which is outside. So, why are you seizing the property? So he plans a 1,500-person protest in this town of 500 people. In the meantime, Alberta Health Services goes in secret to a judge, Justice Rook, in Calgary, and gets what's called an ex parte order, which means they didn't inform Chris Scott's longtime lawyer, Chad Williamson, whom they know how to get a hold of very easily because they've had a series of communications with him all along. And secondarily, the second they got that order, guess who they emailed? Chad. So it's not like they couldn't get a hold of him and give him advance notice. Hey, we're getting this secret order against your client. Why don't you show up and do your side of this, because every Canadian is entitled to have legal representation, but not, I guess, if you're up against AHS. So they got this secret order, but Chris says, no, I have a right to protest the government and I'll just take my chances because a political protest is free expression, right? Well, they came and arrested him at the end of the protest and held him in jail for 3 days of contempt of that court order. And then they ultimately, Justice Adam Germain found him guilty of breaching that court order. However, sneakily it was obtained. That's the protest. It was raining. It was pouring rain. It was just absolutely a nightmare. But people were undeterred because you don't just seize somebody's property in this province and you don't shut down political protests that are outside in the rain. Like I don't know how that would be dangerous. But YouTube, I'm not questioning the science. Don't kill our channel. So that's what happened. And for contempt of a court order that limited his free political expression, Justice Adam Germain issues a judgment that continues to limit his political free expression. And I think we actually have even a clip of what Chris is required to do on all platforms, social media, public speeches, wherever. And in the case of Art Pelosi and his brother David, at church, they have to give this. It's a statement that they have to issue. It is basically the judge's political opinion and the government's talking points with regard to lockdowns, vaccines, and business closures, any of the restrictions. They have to give the accepted government line. It's very Soviet, right? And it's the same thing that Art Peloski's stuck with. And I think AD's just bringing up the clip if you have anything to add, Adam.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, first of all, I want to jump back to the note you made about the lawyers not being contacted. When that happens once or twice, it could be they're just bad lawyers. But in all of these cases, universally, their lawyers are not being contacted. And then worse still, very often the clients aren't being given an opportunity in a reasonable amount of time to contact their lawyers. That's not an above-board way to practice law. And you'd think that these well-paid lawyers from the government's offices would know that they should probably reach out and contact lawyers.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm sure they know this is the strategy. This is
Exactly.
their political strategy here.
Yeah, exactly. And that's obviously it's where what I was getting at was they've clearly done this repeatedly and intentionally. And it was brought up several times throughout the court cases by Chad Williamson and Sarah Miller in both court cases that due process wasn't followed, that these arrests were inappropriate, that in particular with Artur Pawlowski, he didn't have a chance to reach out to his legal counsel in a reasonable amount of time. And yet that didn't seem to factor in. It's almost as if they just got their way. So it's unfortunate. I'm sure the clip's probably ready to roll there for AD. Are we looking at the
Oh, we're just looking at it. Yeah, we actually had a clip of prior of Chris Scott. He was on a Facebook Live and he's like, before I get into any of this, this is what I have to read, but we'll just read it together. So this is the script. This is really completely unheard of in Canada, because a judge can't even compel a murderer to apologize to the family of his victims. You cannot compel a murderer to give speech that he doesn't feel he agrees with. You just can't do that in a free country. This is the script that the guys have to read. I am also aware that the views I am expressing to you on this occasion may not be views held by the majority of medical experts in Alberta. While I may disagree with them, I'm obliged to inform you that the majority of medical experts favor social distancing, mask wearing, and avoiding large crowds to reduce the spread of COVID-19. Most medical experts also support participation in vaccination programs unless for a valid religious or medical reason you cannot be vaccinated. Vaccinations have been shown to statistically save lives and reduce the severity of COVID-19 symptoms. Now, whatever you think, and again, YouTube, in case you're eavesdropping, whatever you think about vaccine, social distancing, or whatever, you can't compel the speech of people. YouTube is making us avoid talking about the science, and we're not going to as long as we're on here. But if you are giving a speech to the public, whatever, posting on your Facebook, you shouldn't have to give the government pharmaceutical salesperson version of what you're trying to say.
And like the absolutely unbelievable thing about this is like this content wasn't discussed. How many times did you live tweet and did I attend outside the court or listen to court? This content was not discussed barely throughout the proceedings. The court proceedings were about whether there was contempt of court or not. This final written ruling was almost exclusively about COVID science. It didn't get into lots of the legal precedent that was provided. It was just about COVID science, which wasn't brought up throughout the court proceedings. So this is just an ideological document that's been put out by this judge. I would love, and I don't know if AD can find it though, but both Artur Pawlowski and Chris Scott have been doing versions of their performance of this state-mandated speech. I've only heard Artur Pawlowski do it once, and he was stopping after each line, providing a counterpoint that was pretty interesting. I don't know if AD can find it's in our. It's in the appeal video though, but there is the clip of Chris Scott going through it, and the crowd just drowns it out, and he doesn't have the actual words, so he's kind of giving a. Sorry, what's that, AD? Okay, he's going to pop it up for us, so that's wonderful. But yes, so the work has been done, and we are obviously going to court and appealing this ridiculous compelled speech mandate. Maybe if you could get into a little bit about what the appeal is going to look like. Are they appealing the contempt charges? Are they appealing the sanctions? Chad gave us a bit of an update on that. Maybe you could share that with us, Sheila?
Yeah, so it sounds like it's an appeal on basically everything, including the sanctions, appealing the cost to the government, appealing the fines, saying the fines are inappropriate considering, and the restrictions on travel also, because the restrictions on travel, they serve as a restriction on free speech, right? Particularly with Pastor Art, he cannot travel to the United States where people are actually interested and concerned about this, because in the United States, they have more of a robust conservative media sphere ecosystem. And so there's a lot of people who are interested in what's happening in Canada there. Also, their politicians tend to be actually conservative when they're on the conservative side of the spectrum. And so they care deeply about religious freedom and free speech, unlike here, where you haven't heard a single conservative politician say, my Lord, what is going on in Alberta with their compelled speech ruling? Even if you disagree with Art on issues of theology, lockdowns, whatever, should a free man be compelled to speak that which the government determines he must speak? But there have been no conservatives at all. Yeah. There's not a single one in the UCP government who said, yeah, this goes way too far. Nobody federally, nothing. It's all coming from the United States. And it's really, truly an embarrassment to the Canadian conservative movement.
And our conservatives are left of Democrats in the United States.
For sure.
Like, we are so far off the spectrum. When people think that they're like centrist in Canada, they are hard left.
I look at Joe Manchin and I'm like, that guy's, that guy, he'd make a good leader of the Conservative Party because he says more conservative things than Aaron O'Toole.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and I think the Conservatives, and we talked about this before, but their whole strategy is to try not to lose, and that's why they never win, because they don't want to say anything. They don't want to offend anybody. They don't want to cross any lines. So you'll even see liberals or Democrats or left-wing people on certain issues, vaccine passports, which we won't talk about too much right now, obviously, but they're starting to voice their opinions, and they're even being more conservative or freedom-oriented than the Conservative Party of Canada on some of these issues, which is pretty wild, pretty unbelievable, certainly. And I mean, I know in the United... So go ahead.
No, I was just going to make sure that AD had that clip of Chad pulled up so that we could show people Chad's plan of attack. Okay.
If not, well, one thing, while he's pulling that up, one thing that I wanted to comment on, when we're talking about the United States, some states did try to implement lockdowns and restrictions, and businesses simply opened, and it worked, and they kind of backed off. Similarly, churches said, well, we have a fundamental freedom, we have the right, charter enshrined right to worship and to gather. In the United States, that was respected. Those businesses were respected, and those churches were respected. I think part of the reason that this is so shocking to Americans, and it should be shocking to us, is one, they fought for their freedoms and earned it, and they didn't simply ask. But two, they respect their charter rights, and they respect those sort of God-given freedoms. They're so shocked to see their neighbor just to the north violating those very same freedoms in such an egregious way. Locking up pastors was international news. Taking the business of a guy who's just trying to stay open like Chris Scott and take care of his people, take care of that community, provide a service that no one anywhere in that area for a long distance provides. That being locked down by the government was jarring. People in Brazil, the United States, Poland, Europe, all over the world know these stories, but Canadians are shockingly apathetic to them because they simply trust their government and they think everything's going to be okay. And they believe that the pastor and the business owner who are just trying to survive are the villains and the government is the good guy.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at even the lockdown on churches in the United States, I think it's Grace Community Church. If I can see from here, Pastor MacArthur, the guys from Grace Life gave me a MacArthur study Bible. You think you're going to get me, do ya? Anyways, Grace Community Church in California, they took the state of California to court and said, you cannot impose restrictions on a church that you have not imposed on Walmart, and they won. So California, crazy California, was less crazy to the churches than conservative Jason Kenney was here in Alberta. And I mean, that is fascinating, that like the church from which Grace Life Church was planted. There's, there's quite a lineage there, but they took California to court and won, and yet the heavy hand of the government cracked down on Grace Life here.
Yeah, there seems to be more scrutiny within the legal system. You don't simply have, I mean, don't get me wrong, they're appointed and they're partisan, but you don't have a failed liberal politician like Justice Adam Germain willy-nilly applying law to enforce ideologies and doctrines based on their political preferences. In the United States, the judicial system, you'll see judges ruling far more based on precedent, and it's far more anchored. And if they falter, the process for sort of review is far more strict. strict, and it seems to be more monitored. Here, I've heard some absolute horror stories. They're anecdotal, so I won't repeat them. But suffice it to say that the firethejudge.com campaign, I think when people start to look into that, and when there is judicial reviews of some of these judges, some of the stories I've heard are absolutely jarring. Some unbelievably even worse than these Chris Scott and Pastor Artur Pawlowski cases. So it's unbelievable stuff.
Yeah, if people want to go to firethejudge.com, there's two ways that you can help. You can first sign the petition, but there's also a link there that will allow you to send an email directly to the overseeing body of Justice Adam Germain. That's the Canadian Judicial Committee. Does that sound right? I think it is. And that, so that's the overseeing body that looks at Justice Adam Germain. And I'm sure on a good day, they don't get very many emails from the public. Oh, look at that. Nearly 26,500 signatures. Now, if everybody who signed that also clicked the little link to send an email to the Canadian Judicial Committee, I think it is, that would be very helpful, because it would really send a message to the people who are really technically in charge of what Justice Adam Germain does. That I think that would really send a message on behalf of not just Art and Chris, but the Canadian public, that you don't want your judges injecting their own politics into the sentences they're issuing people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I don't know if 80s managed to find any of those clips. If not, I'm not hearing them in my ear. If not, though, perhaps we should transition. We're talking about the overreach from government officials, especially in Alberta, but indeed across
let's
Canada.
Just throw to Chad.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
Perfect, yeah.
We've got Chad.
Great.
Infringes on our client's absolute right to freedom of speech and freedom of expression by compelling him to give a specific statement that was handcrafted by the judge in any and all communications relating to COVID and the pandemic. The compelled speech isn't Chris's language. It doesn't represent his belief necessarily, or his free expression. It's mandated, it's compulsory, and it infringes on one of the cardinal constitutional principles that makes Canada a great place in which to live, and that is a foundation of democracy. The ability to express oneself freely. I'm not aware of any case where a court in Canada has ordered someone to say something in circumstances similar to this case. The decision is striking, and it is alarming as well. Compelled speech is un-Canadian, and we don't believe that it is correct in law. We have appealed on constitutional grounds under the Charter and additional legal tenets, and we're optimistic that the Court of Appeal will not allow this decision to stand. If it does, it sets an extremely dangerous precedent for the government or for the court to tell people what to say. That is not freedom, it's not democratic, and it's not Canadian. It's just the opposite. We're appealing on a number of additional grounds as well, and we'll be challenging the provisions of the decision which affect Chris's charter mobility rights and the amount of the fine imposed and the conditions which have been attached to his probation, which we feel are disproportionate in the best case. This is an extremely troubling decision. I've had discussions with dozens of colleagues in the legal arena, and collectively we feel that it represents a bucket of ice water dumped on the flame of freedom and justice in Alberta. This decision could have repercussions across.
So there you have it. You gotta love Chad. And just so people at home really understand the quality of legal representation that Chris has, Chad Williamson, on very little notice, took the Trudeau government to court and won. He beat all of Trudeau's lawyers, his entire Justice Department, and got us into the leaders' debates during the last election. That's the kind of quality legal representation that Chris Scott is getting. And if people want to help offset the cost of that appeal, they can go to fightthefines.com. All donations there flow to the Democracy Fund. That's a registered Canadian charity. And that means that it doesn't go to Chris. It doesn't even go to Chad. Chad has to submit his bills and then the Democracy Fund pays them. It doesn't go to Rebel News. It goes to that registered Canadian charity. And that also means your donations qualify for a charitable tax receipt. So for you at home, they go a little further. But I appreciate Chad's ferocity in fighting this because it's not just about Chris Scott. This means that if you or I go to court for something crazy, we could end up with a compelled speech ruling against us. So it's not just about Chris Scott's free speech. It's really about all of us. But we are up against the juggernaut of the legal system in Alberta, where they have just the deepest pockets. They've got all of your money, so they can just fight us forever. So if people would like to donate to help us overturn this ruling, it's at fightthefines.com. It's really simple. It's your one stop to support civil liberties in this country.
I just wanted to say, one of the things that I found so striking is talking to a number of lawyers, Chad Williamson, Sarah Miller, Derek Fromm, countless others, about this troubling sanction, both against Chris Scott and Pastor Artur Pawlowski. Universally, right away, often on cases, we deal with a lot of defensive people through fightthefines.com and through some of these other initiatives. But right away, all of them zeroed in on that compelled speech mandate as absolutely ridiculous and the primary ground for appeal. This should have people up in arms across the legal world. Lawyers were universally shocked that this compelled speech mandate was there. It's extremely troubling to think that the sanctions, the supposed justice handed down from Justice Germain, is in fact far more offensive than the business being opened or the church being open. I think this is far more unjust and criminal than anything else that has happened or any COVID-19 infraction. The fact that they're actually attempting, the state, to compel a human being to say something against their volition is, by every metric, criminal.
Well, and you look at what the contempt flows from, what the sanctions flow from. It was restriction on their free speech to begin with. The secret court order restricted the church, and it restricted the gathering of the church, and so it restricted religious freedom. And Chris was arrested because he organized a protest, which is political free speech. So these guys are all in jail for exercising free speech, and the judge says, you know what your sentence should be? A restriction on your free speech. Yeah. On what planet?
And I don't know if you remember this, but when there was a number of large, whether it be BLM or pro-Palestine protests, these ones were particularly pro-Palestine, just mere weeks after this Chris Scott protest took place, Dina Hinshaw made a May 31st special exemption order for protests with certain criteria. But they actually, if you have the right political cause or you're the right religious groups, we're not going to look into you as long as you're quiet about it and you don't question this. So it's been political and stilted and one-sided from the very get-go. That's been self-evident. If this was exclusively about adhering to restrictions or preventing the spread of a disease, we wouldn't see that style of enforcement. We would have seen blanket enforcement, not targeted enforcement. They were going after people for ideological reasons from the get-go, and that's why I'm pretty confident they'll be pretty successful in this appeal, because the sanctions are so ridiculous. They've showed their cards. They've put it all out on the table. I encourage you, go to firethejudge.com, sign that petition, read the sanction, read the written ruling for yourself and the transcript. It's unbelievable. It's like Jonathan Swift or something. You can't believe it actually came from a judge who not only took an extra day to release it. We thought he was going to polish it up because we tore apart what was said in court so badly. He took a full extra day to put out this written ruling, and it was as unbelievable as you can imagine. So check it out for yourself.
Yeah, and take a minute to it's not long, compare the transcript to the written ruling, because you can see where the judge ad-libs even more of his own politics into it. The transcript, when he was issuing the ruling, that's what he said in court, where he called Pastor Art's church his alter ego, insinuating that it's just not a real church. It's just a thing that Art does, feeding the homeless and ministering to the least of Calgary citizens, and getting mad because Art went on a cable news channel in the United States. That's Fox News, and liberals like Justice Adam Germain really don't like it. So he had to like put that in to everything, that he got his picture taken with the U.S. member of government. He didn't like that either.
Wow, yeah.
Wow, he got his picture taken with the senator because the Americans care about religious freedom. He was more angry with art that he embarrassed Justice Adam Germain. I think that's what a lot of these sanctions have to do with. It's personal. He's embarrassed. His feelings are hurt. And so he has to smack these guys down and shut them up.
Well, they're used to getting away with it, and that was a big reason. Fire the judge. It's about accountability for Justice Adam Germain, but it's about broader accountability. Justice Rook, some of these other judges, they have been intimately involved. They've clearly coordinated, so only a few judges are looking after the entire thing. I think there's some note, I can't remember if it was in the transcript or the actual written ruling, but that appeals should basically come through Rook or Germain first. Why is there such an ideological stranglehold? If the law was good, they would be happy to have any court of appeal review it because they would believe that the law was being upheld. But they don't want to do that. They want to enforce their ideology. So, yeah, it's something else. But again, we've got the best people. Like you said, we get incredibly good lawyers. Ezra always says that there's nothing more expensive than a cheap lawyer. So these are the best lawyers in the country. If I or you, Sheila, I'm sure we're in trouble. People like Sarah Miller and Chad Williamson are the first people we would call. Often they're the first people we do call. So these people are getting the very best defense, and they can only get that because of your support at fightthefines.com. So thanks to all the viewers out there who've contributed to that over the last little while and continue to.
You know what? Let's make sure we own saveadam.com just to be on the safe side.
Yeah. It's probably owned by some Christian organization, some early reform.
Yeah, that's true. Now, I want to go to a story that you started covering, and I think you really kicked off the momentum for this. And now it's being sort of mainstreamed, and they're all like, oh, I have this really good idea to raise the flag. And we're like, that was us 2 weeks ago, early adopters of good ideas over here. But you know what? At the end of the day, whatever gets that flag up. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this story?
Yeah, so it's very much a two-pronged story. You can very often identify this whole idea of raising the flag as somehow an attack on Indigenous people, and it's anything but that. Dishonoring one group of people doesn't honor another group of people, and raising that flag, and Justin Trudeau saying we have to earn the right. Well, like we said in the original video, Justin Trudeau and people like him will never earn that right. It was earned by people who fought for our freedoms, went overseas, and we're coming up on, it's November 1st, we've got our poppies on. November 11th is Remembrance Day. So we started this last month, but very much the intention was to hope to build momentum so that by, if not before November 11th, that flag is raised to honor soldiers who paid the ultimate sacrifice. The other part of that campaign was also to do the right thing, the Canadian thing, like those soldiers did, to take action and to help Canadians across the border, whether they're Indigenous or otherwise. So it was to get out there and do the right thing, help these Indigenous communities, raise that flag high so we can be proud of them. But really, it's time. People in the Indigenous community, and we're reaching out to them, hoping they'll come on for interviews, have been calling to raise the flag. Don't get me wrong, there's people on both sides of this in the Indigenous community as well as throughout Canada. But many people are saying, we never asked you to lower the flag. We're asking you for clean drinking water. Quit the ceremonial stuff. You can leave that for remembering people in the past. Let's take action to help the Indigenous communities that are suffering now. So it is very much a two-pronged sort of campaign with an emphasis on raising that flag and doing the right Canadian thing, honoring our fallen soldiers and our veterans, and helping Indigenous communities here at home.
AD, maybe you can throw to Adam's video of this, because I think this is one of the best produced videos that I think we've ever done for a campaign launch.
While you're queuing that
says, in the name of time, we're just going to move on, so that's fine. But I get it. I think we showed it last week.
What we're doing, we did show it last week. RaiseOurFlag.ca, I think, is the place to go sign that petition. I think Dave probably we're confirming, but someone is going to be delivering that in Ottawa. Hopefully a few veterans will tag along, and we're going to be delivering that petition prior to Remembrance Day, so that message is heard loud and clear throughout Ottawa and indeed across the country. We invite people to sort of echo and share that so that it gets lots of signatures. Justin Trudeau does not have a monopoly on when that flag goes up and down. That is a decision that we as a nation must make. And the sentiment is pretty clear, whether it be from Indigenous people, veterans, or us Canadian citizens, that at least by Remembrance Day, we owe those people who have paid the ultimate price. We should raise the flag in their honor, certainly before Remembrance Day.
AD, I just flipped a news story to you in your DMs in Slack, and it's about the Mohawks who raised the Canadian flag a couple of days ago. It says you can't lower a flag on November 11th unless you raise it. Mm-hmm. And so Ray Deer answered the phone on a late October day and heard the news that Bo Curot, a Vietnam War veteran, had succumbed to cancer. Deer is president of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 219 in Kanawaki, Mohawk Territory, and such phone calls are ever more a regular occurrence. Deer doesn't dread the calls, mind you, he understands they're a part of life. The 100 or so Mohawk veterans still left in the First Nations community on the south shore of the St. Lawrence River are all getting on in years. Some were in the Korean War or Vietnam, while others were in the Gulf War and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Compared to other places in Quebec, you don't see as many veterans as we have here in our territory. And then let's just skip down. The next death is just as sure as the sunrise, and understanding that a tribute needs to be paid to each departed veteran is one of the reasons Deer and the Kanawake elders resolved that after keeping the flags at half-mast for a 30-day mourning period in the wake of the discovery of 215 unmarked graves at their former Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia, it was time to raise them back up again. We didn't want to have the flags lowered forever, Deer said. Quebec and Canada have never told us as Mohawks what to do, and so we put the flag back up when we felt it was the right time. And I think that's what we all need to do.
Yeah. And
if this is about Indigenous people, sorry to interrupt you, and I'll give you a second, but for me, when I see this, I think, if this is really about Indigenous people, doesn't this dishonor Indigenous veterans who served alongside the rest of Canadian veterans? I mean, they didn't ask for this, and good for the Kanawake Legion for putting their flags back up. It's what we all should do.
Exact same wavelength. That's what I was going to say. People often have this idea that the wars were just fought by white Canadians. There was countless Sikhs, Indigenous people right across the board. In fact, the reason that Canada is a country is because the Indigenous people banded to defend our borders against the Americans. Indigenous warriors are very much part of the reason that Canada exists as it does today. They also contributed in incredibly meaningful ways, even some of their languages being used as uncrackable code for communications. So the Indigenous contribution to the defense of those freedoms is certainly principle. It's important, and that's why in the video you'll notice there are a few shots featuring First Nations combatants and First Nations troops. We wanted to include that in the video to make clear that honoring our fallen soldiers does include Indigenous and a variety of other backgrounds as well. So,
you know, this article that was in the Timmins Press, but I think it's a Canadian Press article, a rare good one. It also notes, for example, highly decorated First Nations veterans such as Ojibwe sniper Francis Pegamagabo, I'm sorry I'm butchering that, but I know exactly who he is because he's a sniper, came back to a country where he couldn't vote and was not considered a citizen and couldn't access his military pension, not until such time as, a conservative prime minister gave him those rights. But let's go on, because I think the next line is very important. When he was in uniform, he was considered an equal. Adrian Hayes, author of a book on Pega Magabo, once told CBC News, but not so much when he came home. And I think that's important, that this is about all Canadian veterans, because as Adrian Hayes rightly points out, everybody in uniform was equal. They served alongside each other. It was unfortunately sometimes back when they came back to Canada that they weren't equal, but now's a time where we can honor each one of their sacrifices, and we can't do that with the flags down.
No. And that point about them being equal in uniform or on paper or in concept very much speaks to this lowering of the flag. Because if these government officials who are keeping this flag down really believe that, and this is the truth, but if they actually believe that Indigenous people are equal to every other Canadian, they would not allow these clean drinking water, long-term boil water advisories to continue. This simply wouldn't happen in white Canada. They can lower the flags and they can do that symbolic stuff, but ultimately their inaction, it echoes. It's the same sentiment as when he came home and when push came to shove, he wasn't an equal part of society. And we can lower the flags all we want, but as long as those people don't have decent living conditions and don't have clean drinking water, simply put, they are not in the eyes of this government and the governments who've not done something about this equal to the rest of Canadians because they're not being treated as such.
Yeah, we need tangible action, not symbolism that distracts from actually doing something. And as I pointed out before we started this segment, this is something that even Scaredy Cat Aaron O'Toole is talking about now, is he's talking about, yeah, it's time to raise the flags. Being a Canadian Forces former service member himself, I'll give him credit for bringing this forward. However, it's pretty close to Remembrance Day to be even talking about this sort of stuff. This should have been done months ago, at least a month ago, but at least he's talking about it. And my point to all of that is we are mainstream conservatives, and it's important for us as rebels and as rebel supporters for us to bring these ideas to the forefront, because sometimes it shows the scaredy cats in the Conservative Party that it's okay to talk about these issues. Let us create momentum for them so that you don't have to be scared.
Yeah, and being willing to ask the tough questions and raise these issues that, unlike lots of these other media outlets, they'll report on a story without ever being there, or they'll be there for 15 minutes. We're on the ground talking to people, whether it's out on First Nations territories or at these freedom marches or wherever it may be. We're there. We stay there for the whole day. We really talk to people. So we really have a feeling of the pulse of the nation. So when we ask questions to Jason Kenney about vaccine passports, let's say, and they're important questions that people want to ask but are too afraid to, mainstream media picks it up. When we say that it's about time to both honor these Indigenous people and raise our flag to honor our veterans, that's an idea that resonates. So mainstream media picks it up. They are watching. They might like to deny it, but when we talk to these people, they all know we are. They know our faces. They're watching because they know that this is real journalism.
We have about 13 minutes left in the show, and I think we should maybe say see you in a minute to our YouTube friends. Join us over on Rumble, Odyssey, or Super U, because I think we're going to get into the danger zone when we talk about some of the, when we're going to talk about some of the COVID content and what our Chief Medical Officer of Health, Teresa Tam, has to say, because that's one of the YouTube restrictions, by the way, is you cannot really question the advice of the public health officers, because apparently they have more authority to speak on certain issues than Catholics give the Pope. Like it's just crazy. It's blasphemy to speak ill of these people or even question the advice they give you that was somehow different than what it was 2 weeks ago. It's crazy.
Apparently they won't even show up to court to justify their opinions. So,
isn't that strange? AD,